for Education, and school board members, parents, school neighbors, unsuspecting coffee drinkers in the back row. And if any students are any students there, I want to give you a special hello. I'm founder of several schools, including since 1991, the Grauer School, which is a nonprofit public charity. Oh, I also want to say hello. Is there any press there?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, hello. Thank you for covering this and making education a priority. I've worked at many schools, including adjunct professor of education at two universities. But the Grauer School in Encinitas, California, is fairly unique among college prep schools in that in nationwide surveys of student engagement, our students have consistently ranked in the top 99th percentile in areas such as feelings of connectedness, belongingness, engagement, and sense of safety, while getting 100% of our students into their chosen post-high school paths, normally college. And our access to Grauer endowment enables us to include diverse students, discounting hundreds of thousands of dollars each year for deserving kids who want to come to the Grauer School. Plus, I regularly accredit schools for WASC, which is the largest accreditor in the country, the accreditor of the University of California. Working with teens every day for 4+ decades, I've seen pain and troubles and joys from them and their parents and teachers. Two books of honor filled with stories of what I've learned, plus many articles. And I've made a specialty of researching smaller schools and founded the Small Schools Coalition, and I consult for people all over the world. In fact, I've presented for quite a few coffee shops. And Pat Paul contacted me when you all learned that your district administrators are considering consolidating the three existing elementary schools into one school of about 1,500. Are there any of the district administrators there today?
No.
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 Okay, they're welcome to give me a call, and that's not an uncommon thing to consider at all. And many of you loved your neighborhood schools, though, being able to walk or bike to school, and some of you want to learn much more about small schools, and some of you have even formed the Bowling Green Schools for Kids to help more people learn about that. And so I've developed a list of 18 questions, and I can cover them in about 30 minutes. I appreciate, once again, all your interest in this important, often very highly politically charged issue. I'm sure you'll learn a great deal in the next 30 minutes, and I appreciate the opportunity to present before people who are passionate about education, whatever your viewpoints. You might agree with some of this, disagree with some. I have no vested interest in your outcome. I'm simply bearing information many people have found to bear sharing. If you don't like it, and you don't lynch me, I also play the 5-string banjo. I've been studying small schools for many years, doing close research on them for about 10 years. And I'm not being paid anything to do this. I just love sharing with communities. And I love sharing what's possible in schooling. But I don't want to offend anyone who has a different viewpoint. I just want to share. And I also want you to understand, and want your school administrators to understand, that what I'm going to share is not information that almost any school board or local government would have at their fingertips. There's a ton of new information here for you to consider. So anyway, thank you. Let me get down to business with the first of my 18 questions, which is, what's the value or specific advantage of schools being set within a community? So local schools fulfill not just schooling and education, but they fulfill a human scale function. They orient us to our own histories and neighborhoods. They're anchors of continuity in the places where we are from. The original point of schools was to carry on a sense of place. Schools are where young people first learn how to interact with their communities in official and personal capacities, and they offer a touchstone to reconnect with later in life. For instance, because we're a small school at the Grauer School, we host on our grounds weddings, coming of age ceremonies, and many of life's milestones, including funerals that have no place in bureaucratic institutions. A large school is not built for the same reasons as the small school. It's built for a few reasons. Large schools, because people think there'll be an economy of scale. Uh, Courts wants larger schools because they believe if they bus all the kids together, there'll be integration with
Uh-oh.
all the kids. The large school feels more forbidding to mix in, and there are many more cliques, and I'll get to that later. A third reason for large schools is big helmet sports, or at least the arena image supplanting the small village image. $60 million football arenas that seem attractive and are attractive to many, but actually serve a minority of students. Kids actually have higher percentages of engagement in clubs and sports in small schools, but they're not as competitive or arena oriented. And next, big schools can purchase big programs. And I'll get to that a little later too. Number two question, is the school within a school model equal to small schools throughout a community? Well, I've read a lot about the schools within a school model and seen some of them. I visited some in China, in fact, and I've read research on how they can work if and only if each school or wing of the school has a very distinctive committed theme: bilingual, expeditionary learning, international baccalaureate, etc. If done that way, they appear to preserve more of the community than the comprehensive large school model. Assuming the large consolidated school model is the only choice, I would favor that over a general comprehensive school model which lumps 1 or 2 or 3,000 kids all into the same compound. Question number three, what's a community school? A community school is a school that's set inside something like a neighborhood. Today, however, I've heard the term community school used for almost anything. If the term is applied to a consolidated larger school where kids are coming from various communities, it renders the term false. We hear large public schools named academies as well, which also distorts the traditional meaning. The thing that enables a school to be more of a community school is that it has immediate and close access to various neighborhood resources and services, such as local elders and volunteers and shopkeepers. But community school is merely an adjective. It's a general description. It's not a defined term or a proper noun. When you combine schools, this is not typical as a community school. This is a consolidated or a comprehensive school. Number four, does a consolidated school unite and create a stronger community? Consolidated neighborhood schools into larger schools does not create any known use of the term community school. When you board up small schools and create a large one, this does not create a sense of community except in situations, as I pointed out, like large athletic matches or theaters that can be attractive to many people, but actually to a minority of kids. Large consolidated schools are shown to feel less safe and inclusive for children and to have lower teacher and student happiness levels. More on that later as well. Larger schools do not provide instructional advantages. As for homeowners, the ones who live near the school like it more, whatever its size. And people who used to have a neighborhood school and now need to commute are normally ruffled. Their neighborhood loses what it often sees as a treasure or an anchor or a historical context. 5, a question that's very important. What is a small school? Public schools under 400 retain pretty much all of the safe and higher performance aspects of the true small school, even with their higher class sizes. I define a small school as less than 400, optimal at half that. There are varying definitions, though. The U.S. Department of Education released a report defining small as fewer than 300 students and found that principals from small schools reported far fewer discipline problems than principals from large schools. 6, what are the advantages of a small school? For many students, the social scene in large high schools is tough and unforgiving, with sharp distinctions made between the small group of social haves with the far larger masses of have-nots. Students are not only physically safer in schools of less than 400, they feel emotionally safer, and they're more connected with adults, which positively impacts learning. Through small schools, students are absent much less, drop out at nearly half the rate, have higher grade point averages, and improve reading scores by almost half-year grade equivalency more than at large schools, according to Educational Leadership magazine. Small schools appear to have higher cost per pupil than large schools. They appear to, and so they appear attractive. Large schools appear attractive at first cut. Let's do a second cut. Small schools have a lower cost per graduate since they tend to have lower dropout rates. According to a U.S. Department of Education study, the higher percentage of dropouts from large schools are associated with serious additional societal costs, such as crime and lifetime earnings. When you drop out, your lifetime earnings drop dramatically, but that is left out of the school funding formulas. According to the Alliance for Excellent Education's issue, a 2011 brief called "The High Cost of High School Dropouts," they find that if the high school students who dropped out of the class of 2011 had graduated, the nation's economy would likely have benefited from nearly $154 billion in additional income over the course of their lifetimes. Levin of Columbia University and Rouse of Princeton calculated that each new graduate confers a net benefit to taxpayers of about $127,000 over that graduate's lifetime. In a 2014 study of the nation's most academically challenging schools, 40% of them were schools of fewer than 350 students, a distribution in favor of small schools. Even though 3 out of 4 suburban public high schools students attend a high school with 1,000 students or more. So those are amazing odds. And small schools have a leaner administrative structure. In today's large comprehensive schools, around 50% of all people do not work with kids. Admin is much more likely to teach at small schools, and so they know the kids. Indiana University issues the annual HESI, or High School Survey of Student Engagement, every year nationwide. The High School Survey of Student Engagement in almost all categories finds that students from small schools report significantly higher levels of engagement and attitudes towards school than both medium and large schools. Students from small schools report significantly higher levels of cognitive engagement and academic effort than students from large schools. Unfortunately, engagement is also left out of funding formulas, as is retraining teachers who quit the field at higher rates in larger schools. Replacing a teacher costs between $4,400 and $17,900, according to the RAND Corporation. I'll get to violence later. Number 7. Why should small schools matter to your district and community? As noted, students in small schools reported significantly higher levels of engagement, effort, and attitudes towards school than both medium and large schools. They also report higher levels of positive relationships with adults and other students than their large school counterparts. Research has shown that all of these characteristics have serious implications for academic achievement, for violence, and again, for school dropout rates. A U.S. Department of Education study found that schools with more than 1,000 students had far higher rates of violent student behavior than students with fewer than 300 students. And teachers and students in small schools were far less likely to be victims of crime. Relationships with parents are more vibrant at small schools. Relationships with elders, local shopkeepers, and neighbors all stay vital versus the distant, comprehensive school fenced in at the edge of town. Number 8, do children need additional support from older children? And if so, how is a smaller or larger school advantageous? All students from K through 12 are and feel safer in small schools. One reason that's widely overlooked now is age mixing. So kids are mentoring one another more, as occurred traditionally, actually for something like 40,000 years. That's been the predominant form of educating humans. They're more like families in small tribe-like groups. Age mixing is the oldest form of teaching, and it's been removed almost completely from the strictly age-segregated large school. If Bowling Green goes to schools within schools models, there will be some small schools benefits, but maybe not that one. As a teacher and a parent, I treasure age mixing and mentoring whenever I see it. Kids really need it. Number 10, does bullying increase in a setting that is larger? The incidence of bullying is much larger in medium and large schools. There's no major incidence of violence ever reported in a small school. Most people believe that this is because we have fewer disenfranchised students in small schools. We know who they are. There are higher ratings in belonging, a sense of safety and connection, and there's more mentoring. Plus, regardless of actual bullying, students feel less threatened in smaller schools and more personal environments. They feel safer in smaller schools. Regarding busing, there's research on this, research on student feelings of threat and fear riding school buses, which they do for millions of hours a year going to consolidated schools. School buses are one of the top places where childhood bullying happens. In fact, without a category, the environmental and public works impacts of running those buses through your towns every day are always left out of funding formulas. Number 11, is a small school or a large school safer? I think I've covered this pretty well, but much of the research is skewed by studies that misdefine small. So be careful about that. They're including schools of over 400 and even 500 in small schools. You're going to get more bullying. A 500 student school loses some of the qualities of a small school. By creating greater opportunities to get to know their teachers and peers on a deeper interpersonal level, small schools can create a culture of connectedness, providing the most sought after characteristics of belongingness, inclusion, and connectedness. Number 12, will a consolidated larger elementary school promote student achievement and address students' individual needs? All the research starts to lose some clarity when people define small schools as over 400. And in an amazing case of that, Bill Gates funded small schools in New York City not too many years ago, and they started out at less than 400, and they were seen as a major breakthrough in student safety and achievement and touted by the mayor, and they started to multiply. And naturally, they were popular, and they grew to 500, and then the new research started coming in, And it was different research, and it was telling everyone, hey, small schools don't really work that well. And so they started closing down some of the so-called small schools that weren't small schools. So that was really heartbreaking research. Countless studies on school achievement and dropout rates are telling us that kids who feel confident, connected, and autonomous are more engaged in their schools and their learning, and they do better academically than isolated or disenfranchised peers. A recent U.S. Department of Education study says, quote, a higher percentage of students across all socioeconomic levels are successful when they're part of smaller, more intimate learning communities. Security improves and violence decreases, as does student alcohol and drug abuse. A small school size encourages teachers to innovate and students to participate, resulting in higher grades and test scores, improved attendance rates, and lower dropout rates. So one of my messages today is to start with connection and sense of safety, and the academics come in the most natural way in the world, rather than starting the other way around. As noted before, study after study shows how feelings of belongingness and relatedness, characteristic in smaller learning communities, support students' intrinsic motivation, which includes an interest in a subject, an understanding of its relevance outside the classroom, a sense of accomplishment when mastering it, and a calling to it. This is why so many people today are leaving consolidated schools, and a movement forming homeschools and charter schools. And people are not seeing their kids mentored or engaged as well in the larger schools. And all equally heartbreaking, teachers are leaving too, and en masse. The research on teachers leaving the large schools is really scary for our future, and not enrolling in graduate schools of education. Look at that data. But